Hello, how are we doing? I am Sam and you are listening to Chilliteracy, where tonight, before too long, I shall be carrying on with Kidnapped by Robert Louis Stevenson from chapter 15, which is linked at the top of chat there if you wanted to read along. But first, as always, let's do what we always do and just sit and ramble for a bit with stuff and catch up and see how people are doing. Might be time to replace a computer, as painful as that is. Yeah, I have been looking at that. So this is for anyone listening on YouTube. Firstly, hello, welcome. Thank you for listening on YouTube. If you're not subscribed to the channel, we'd love to have you. It's free, it costs you nothing, and it makes me and Lucy feel a little bit better about the thing that we're doing here. But yeah, we were discussing. I was asked how I'm doing and how my computer's doing. I've been a little bit unwell today, so I was saying that this might be a slightly shorter stream than usual. Well, I say slightly. It might be half a stream like last week's was, depending on how I go. We shall see. But yeah, I would be very sad to have to replace this one because it's only it's a bit over 2 years old because it's just a bit out of warranty. Not that I'm that convinced they would do much if I sent it in to be fixed, because it was a different manufacturer, but I had a bad experience with that before, where I had a laptop that was not functioning correctly and kept crashing all the time. And I sent it in, and all they did was reinstall Windows for me, which I had already done a few times before, but they didn't even tell me what they did. They just sent it back, and I'm like, yeah, it's fine. And I eventually asked, and they're like, oh yeah, we just reinstalled Windows. Oh, thanks guys, that's literally done nothing to fix the problem, but no, you're the best. It's great. So yeah, but this has been ongoing, and it seems like it's getting worse because the problem had gone away and now it's come back under previous conditions where it wasn't a problem. So I'm sort of down to last hopes of getting a can of compressed air and just blasting it through anywhere that air will flow, in the hope that it unclogs something that's causing a problem. And if that doesn't do it, then yeah. Except the problem that I have with this is that if it were just dead, if it were just entirely cooked and wouldn't turn on and wouldn't, if it was just bricks, then it would be like, okay, well, that's an easy call to make. It don't work. I don't know how to fix this, therefore I can just start eyeing up replacements. Whereas as it is, it's I'm using it now. Under these conditions, it works okay. It even works playing some games. I made it through Thank Goodness You're Here, streaming that just fine. I've been playing Deadlock consistently, and it gets through that just fine. And then the last couple of nights I've loaded up a couple of, I guess, more graphically intensive games, and it's just gone, nah, and just collapsed. So yeah, we're not here to discuss tech problems, but just thought I'd give a rundown on where it's at. But then replacements ain't cheap, what with things being what they are. Counterpoint, now is the best time to replace it before it's too late to back up and copy over anything important. True, although unless it's a drive failure, that's the other thing I've been considering. Is do I just try to back up everything, scrub it back to factory, do a big old factory reset, and then hope that maybe it's just something software related that's doing it anyway, but then doing a big backup of all your stuff is an absolute nightmare. And what I would do on a new PC is just take one of the drives out and put it into the new one. Yeah, backups, I know, backups are good, but backups are difficult. They're a real hassle to do, so... But I will say that I will do that and think about doing that. Yeah. That's the thing, sometimes the sort of tabula rasa of a new PC is nice. It's oh, well, all that stuff's gone. On to the new thing, and, it's gone. Oh, well. You said it's a bit horrible about keeping backups. I can, as a fellow do as I say, not as I do. I can relate that. Yeah, that checks out. Also, possibly, I don't know if she's listening in, but hello to my mum, as well as the usual hello to Jason Isaacs and hello to Sherlock Holmes. Hello to my mum, who may be listening in from the hospital this evening, where she is recovering from, from a broken leg a couple of weeks ago now. And she doesn't have a Twitch account, I don't think, or isn't logged in. So if she's listening, she won't be able to say anything in chat. But, I thought I'd say hello in case she's here and listening in to hear me do some bad Scottish accents later. I hope she's doing okay. Yeah, she's doing alright. I think mostly just kind of bored. Sitting in a room in an NHS hospital. It's not the most enjoyable time. But you're all lovely, thank you. If she doesn't see that, I will make sure that she knows she is loved and valued by the community. I'll probably get a WhatsApp message on my phone saying, "Oh, everyone's lovely." But yeah, thank you all. That's really nice. And yeah, hello to everyone that's here. I hope you're all well. Lynn, I saw you're going to be doing some beading and fixing some mistakes from past Lynn, so good luck with that. And everyone else who's here. Hi. How are you all? Hope you're well. Lucy will not be turning into chat this evening because she is flying tomorrow morning and is getting some sleep for early journeys. So I'm afraid you've just got me this evening. But I figure that's okay. Sending everyone the good vibes from your banger week. Oh, let's go. Nice one, Salad. What's... If you have details that you would like to share, obviously, had a good week can be information enough, but if you've got other stuff you wish to share with the class, feel free. Really glad to hear you've had a good week. That's great. Nice one. But yeah, otherwise for me, I'm just trying to think what else I have to say, really. You've heard my troubles and lamentations. Lucy's not here, that means we should post this a lot. Yes, in fact, feel free to post that as much as you like. If anyone here hasn't clicked on that video, on that link, and gone over to that YouTube channel, that's youtube.com/@LucyTrumpetHumphrey. No, that's not how any of that's pronounced, Lucy Humphreys Trumpet. Wow. Oh, we're starting strong today. Don't worry, I've only got... Say that again? No, you can't make me. I think I might have actually just said her true name and possibly cursed her. I'm not sure. Is that how that works? Homework for the stream, watch a Lucy video. Yeah, exactly. Go do that. Don't listen to anything that I just tried to say. You have a degree since Monday and reconnected with a friend from primary school. Hey, awesome, and congratulations. Well done. That's super cool. Yeah, no, I think I might have just opened some kind of fake contract and cursed Lucy. I don't know. We'll be careful with how we say that in future. But yeah, now I'm about to attempt reading some story written in Scottish from Scotland, from Girders. So, and also Robert Louis Stevenson. So that's going to be a good time to recap where we got to last time. David, our protagonist, David Balfour, there's a lot of recapping we could do. He received a letter written by his late father saying, hey, go visit your uncle. And he goes to his uncle, and his uncle's like, yeah, don't ask me anything about my I'm definitely not acting suspiciously t-shirt. The question's already answered by the shirt. By the way, could you go and fetch me something from the dark staircase down the other end of my estate? Don't turn the lights on. There's no lights. Don't take a light with you. Just ordinary, like, dark stairs. Don't worry about it. Oh, you didn't fall down the stairs and die? Dinger. Okay, well, don't worry, nephew. Trust me. I'm legit. We're going to go into town and talk to some friend of mine who's a legit businessman and will help us sort out the matter of your inheritance right quick. We'll do that. But first, have you met this ship's captain? Bonk, you're now on board a ship. And so David has been, title drop, kidnapped and bundled onto a ship with a head injury. And found, unfortunately, that the crew of the ship can be hastily scrawled over press gang a sign on the pub. Yeah, exactly. Found that the ship's crew are not, or haven't been particularly accommodating. Somewhat hardy. One of them in particular, somewhat violent and murderous. Killed a boy. Everyone feels very bad about that. And then he also encountered a chap called Alan Breck, who happens to be escorting a large sum of money from Scotland to France. What's a little light manslaughter on a Saturday night? It is Saturday night. You might want to append in Minecraft to that. But yeah, encountered Alan Breck, and then encountered the crew plotting to kill Alan and to take his money. And David, being a very good-natured, upstanding, raised Christian boy, was like, well, that seems immoral. But they do outnumber Alan many to one. So why don't we half that number, and I'll go and tell Alan that they plan to kill him. Alan was like, alright, that won't do. You take this gun, I'll take this sword, and we'll fight them in this little room. And they do, and it's actually quite a bloody description of the fight. Like, a lot of people get cut up and stabbed and shot in the head and the knees and stuff. Which, I actually kind of caught me unawares. I was like, oh, right, okay, this is not necessarily a book for the children's. But they end up kind of killing enough of the crew that the captain and what's left decide to retreat. Not the knees. Somewhere in the leg. Maybe not the knee. And in the process, Mr. Shewan, the guy that wasn't particularly great at any times, got killed, but he was also the navigator, which then put them in something of a bad position when navigating the somewhat treacherous, coast of Scotland, and thus, skipping a little bit, the ship got hit by some waves, slammed into some rocks. Very bad things happened to a lot of people on board the ship, and David, your protagonist, got washed overboard and wound up on an island where he learned a thing or two about tides, but not particularly fast, because he thought he was completely stuck on this island and could only look across water at the mainland, and then he'd go and sit on his rock over the other side of the island, and then a couple of fellas in a boat after, he was there for 3 days, making himself violently sick, eating raw shellfish off rocks, and drinking peaty water. And then a couple of guys in a boat come sailing past, and he's like, help me, I'm marooned. And they just look at him and laugh and sail on. He wishes them dead. And then the next day they come sailing back, and he's like, I hate you guys, you suck. And they speak Gaelic at him, but he manages to make out the word tide. And then he realises, oh, yeah, I'm an inland boy that knows nothing of the sea, but don't they have this thing called the tide out here, where the water level raises and lowers? Good grief, I could have walked across to the mainland any time that the tide was out. Well, peace. And leaves and walks across to the mainland, and that's kind of where things were left. David feeling like something of a fool. This whole bit not exactly played for comedy, but not entirely not played for comedy. He has a miserable time and doesn't hide the fact that he was genuinely deep down in the pits of despair, but there is something inherently comic about them going, yo, my guy, you can just walk over there, just here, you can go do that. And then him realizing that all this misery was for nothing. So yeah, that's where it was left, I believe. And so now, if we're ready, if we like, TLDR, everything is fine. Yeah, exactly, he's fine. He's back in mainland Scotland, where everybody is welcoming to everybody. That's a lie. This is set during a time of massive political upheaval, disagreement, dispute, two kind of big warring factions. What's the... is there a... I'm just kind of reading, quickly skimming somewhere in the back to see if there's a mention of the name of the era in which this is set. is in the aftermath of the Jacobite Rebellion. So there's that. Yeah. But yes, if we're ready, Grimes, the messages on Discord. Oh no, nothing important. That's cool. Well, nothing for right now. They're all important messages, Bron. But yeah, I shall carry on. I shall carry on with the story if we're ready. If you click the link, if you want, if you're settled, if you got a pet. Joey was in the room in his cube. He has now left, so he'll be back. Don't worry. But yeah, shall we continue? Can I have some water first? And then let's carry on with Kidnapped by Robert Louis Stevenson. Chapter 15. The Lad with the Silver Button Through the Isle of Mull. The Ross of Mull, which I had now got upon, was rugged and trackless, like the isle I had just left, being all bog and briar and big stone. There may be roads for them that know the country well, but for my part I had no better guide than my own nose, and no other landmark than Ben Moor. I aimed as well as I could for the smoke I had seen so often from the island, and with all my great weariness and the difficulty of the way, came upon the house in the bottom of a little hollow, about 5 or 6 at night. 1 second. I'm back. It was low and longish, roofed with turf and built of unmortared stones, and on a mound in front of it, an old gentleman sat smoking his pipe in the sun. With what little English he had, he gave me to understand that my shipmates had got safe ashore and had broken bread in that very house on the day after. "Was there one?" I asked, "dressed like a gentleman?" He said they all wore rough great coats, but to be sure the first of them, the one that came alone, wore breeches and stockings, while the rest had sailor's trousers. "Ah," said I, "and he would have a feathered hat." He told me, no, that he was bare-headed like myself. At first I thought Alan might have lost his hat, and then the rain came in my mind, and I judged it more likely he had put it out of harm's way under his great coat. This set me smiling, partly because my friend was safe, partly to think of his vanity in dress. And then the old gentleman clapped his hands to his brow and cried out that I must be the lad with the silver button. "Why, yes," said I, in some wonder. "Well then," said the old gentleman, "I have a word for you, that you are to follow your friend to his country by Chilliteracy." He then asked me how I had fared, and I told him my tale. A south country man would certainly have laughed, but this old gentleman, I call him so because of his manners, for his clothes that were dropping off his back, heard me all through with nothing but gravity and pity. When I had done, he took me by the hand, led me into his hut, it was no better, and presented me before his wife, as if she had been the queen and I a duke. The good woman set oat bread before me and a cold grouse, patting my shoulder and smiling to me all the time, for she had no English, and the old gentleman, not to be behind, brewed me a strong punch out of their country spirit. All the while I was eating, and after that when I was drinking the punch, I could scarce come to believe in my good fortune. And the house, though it was thick with the peat smoke and as full of holes as a colander, seemed like a palace. The punch threw me in a strong sweat and a deep slumber. The good people let me lie, and it was near noon of the next day before I took the road, my throat already easier and my spirit quite restored by good fare and good news. The old gentleman, although I pressed him hard, would take no money, and gave me an old bonnet for my head, though I am free to own I was no sooner out of view of the house than I very jealously washed this gift of his in a wayside fountain. Thought I to myself, if these are the wild Highlanders, I could wish my own folk wilder. I not only started late, but I must have wandered nearly half the time. True, I met plenty of people grubbing in little miserable fields that would not keep a cat, or herding little kine about the bigness of asses. The Highland dress being forbidden by law since the rebellion, and the people condemned to the lowland habit, which they much disliked, it was strange to see the variety of their array. Some went bare, only for a hanging cloak or great coat, and carried their trousers on their backs like a useless burthen. Some had made an imitation of the tartan, with little parti-coloured stripes patched together like an old wife's quilt. Others, again, still wore the Highland philabeg, but by putting a few stitches between the legs, transformed it into a pair of trousers like a Dutchman's. All those makeshifts were condemned and punished, for the law was harshly applied in hopes to break up the clan spirit. But in that out-of-the-way, sea-bound isle, there were few to make remarks and fewer to tell tales. They seemed in great poverty, which was no doubt natural now that rapine was put down, and the chiefs kept no longer an open house, and the roads, even such a wandering country by-track as the one I followed, were infested with beggars. And here, again, I marked a difference from my own part of the country. For our lowland beggars, even the gownsmen themselves who beg by patent, had a louting, flattering way with them, and if you gave them a plaque and asked change, would very civilly return you a bottle. But these Highland beggars stood on their dignity, asked alms only to buy snuff, by their account, and would give no change. To be sure, this was no concern of mine, except in so far as it entertained me by the way. What was much more to the purpose, few had any English, and these few, unless they were of the brotherhood of beggars, not very anxious to place it at my service. I knew Chilliteracy to be my destination, and repeated the name to them and pointed. But instead of simply pointing in reply, they would give me a screed of the Gaelic that set me foolish, so it was small wonder if I went out of my road as often as I stayed in it. At last, about 8 at night, and already very weary, I came to a lone house, where I asked admittance, and was refused, until I bethought me of the power of money in so poor a country, and held up one of my guineas in my finger and thumb. Thereupon the man of the house, who had hitherto pretended to have no English, and driven me from his door by signals, suddenly began to speak as clearly as was needful, and agreed for 5 shillings to give me a night's lodging, and guide me the next day to Chilliteracy. I slept uneasily that night, fearing I should be robbed, but I might have spared myself the pain, for my host was no robber, only miserably poor and a great cheat. He was not alone in his poverty, for the next morning we must go 5 miles about to the house of what he called a rich man to have one of my guineas changed. This was perhaps a rich man for Mull. He would have scarce been thought so in the south, for it took all he had. The whole house was turned upside down, and a neighbour brought under contribution before he could scrape together 20 shillings in silver. The odd shilling he kept for himself, protesting he could ill afford to have so great a sum of money lying locked up. For all that he was very courteous and well-spoken, made us both sit down with his family to dinner, and brewed punch in a fine china bowl, over which my rascal guide grew so merry that he refused to start. I was for getting angry, and appealed to the rich man, Hector McLean was his name, who had been a witness to our bargain and to my payment of the 5 shillings. But McLean had taken his share of the punch, and vowed that no gentleman should leave his table after the bowl was brewed, so there was nothing for it but to sit and hear Jacobite toasts and Gaelic songs, till all were tipsy and staggered off to the bed or the barn for their night's rest. Next day, the 4th of my travels, we were up before 5 upon the clock, but my rascal guide got to the bottle at once, and it was 3 hours before I had him clear of the house, and then, as you shall hear, only for a worse disappointment. As long as we went down a heathery valley that lay before Mr. McLean's house, all went well. Only my guide looked constantly over his shoulder, and when I asked him the cause, only grinned at me. No sooner, however, had we crossed the back of a hill, and got out of sight of the house windows, than he told me Chilliteracy lay right in front, and that a hilltop, which he pointed out was my best landmark. "I care very little for that," said I, "since you are going with me." The impudent cheat answered me in the Gaelic that he had no English. "My fine fellow," I said, "I know very well your English comes and goes. Tell me, what will bring it back? Is it more money you wish?" "5 shillings more," said he, "and a sale will bring you there." I reflected a while and then offered him 2, which he accepted greedily and insisted on having in his hands at once. "For luck," as he said, but I think it was rather for my misfortune. The 2 shillings carried him not quite as many miles, at the end of which distance he sat down upon the wayside and took off his brogues from his feet like a man about to rest. I was now red hot. "Ah," said I, "have you no more English?" He said impudently, "No." At that I boiled over and lifted my hand to strike him, and he, drawing a knife from his rags, squatted back and grinned at me like a wildcat. At that, forgetting everything but my anger, I ran in upon him and put aside his knife with my left and struck him in the mouth with the right. I was a strong lad and very angry, and he but a little man, and he went down before me heavily. By good luck his knife flew out of his hand as he fell. I picked up both that and his brogues, wished him a good morning, and set off upon my way, leaving him barefoot and disarmed. I chuckled to myself as I went, being sure I was done with that rogue for a variety of reasons. First, he knew he could have no more of my money. Next, the brogues were worth in that country only a few pence, and lastly, the knife, which was really a dagger, it was against the law for him to carry. In about half an hour of walk, I overtook a great, ragged man moving pretty fast but feeling before him with a staff. He was quite blind, and told me he was a catechist, which should have put me at my ease. But his face went against me. It seemed dark and dangerous and secret, and presently, as we began to go on alongside, I saw the steel butt of a pistol sticking from under the flap of his coat pocket. To carry such a thing meant a fine of £15 sterling upon a first offence, and transportation to the colonies upon a second. Nor could I quite see why a religious teacher should go armed, or what a blind man could be doing with a pistol. I told him about my guide, for I was proud of what I had done, and my vanity for once got the heels of my prudence. At the mention of the 5 shillings he cried out so loud that I made up my mind I should say nothing of the other 2, and was glad he could not see my blushes. "Was that too much?" I asked, a little faltering. "Too much?" cries he. "Why, I'll give you to Chilliteracy myself for a dram of brandy, and give you the great pleasure of my company, me that is a man of some learning, in the bargain." I said I did not see how a blind man could be a guide, but at that he laughed aloud, and said his stick was eyes enough for an eagle. "In the Isle of Mull, at least," says he, "where I know every stone and heather bush by mark of head. See now," he said, striking right and left as if to make sure, "down there a burn is running, and at the head of it there stands a bit of a small hill with a stone cocked upon the top of that, and it's hard at the foot of the hill that the way runs by to Chilliteracy, and the way here, being for droves, is plainly trodden, and will show grassy through the heather." I had to own he was right in every feature, and told my wonder. "Ha!" says he, "that's nothing. Would you believe me now that before the Act came out, and when there were weapons in this country, I could shoot?" "Aye, could I," cries he, and then with a leer, "If you had such a thing as a pistol here to try with, I'd show you how it's done." I told him I had nothing of the sort, and gave him a wider berth. If he had known, his pistol stuck at that time quite plainly out of his pocket, and I could see the sun twinkle on the steel of the butt. But by the better luck for me, he knew nothing, thought it was all covered, and lied on in the dark. He then began to question me cunningly where I came from, whether I was rich, whether I could change a 5 shilling piece for him, which he declared he had at that moment in his sporran, and all the time he kept edging up to me, and I avoiding him. We were now upon a sort of green cattle track which crossed the hills towards Chilliteracy, and we kept changing sides upon that like dancers in a reel. I had so plainly the upper hand that my spirits rose, and indeed I took a pleasure in this game of blind man's buff. But the catechist grew angrier, and at last began to swear in Gaelic and to strike for my legs with his staff. 1 sec. Then I told him that, sure enough, I had a pistol in my pocket as well as he, and if he did not strike across the hill due south, I would even blow his brains out. He became, at once, very polite, and after trying to soften me for some time, but quite in vain, he cursed me once more in the Gaelic and took himself off. I watched him striding along, through the bog and briar, tapping with his stick, until he turned the end of a hill and disappeared in the next hollow. Then I struck on again for Chilliteracy, much better pleased to be alone than to travel with that man of learning. This was an unlucky day, and these two, of whom I had just rid myself one after the other, were the two worst men I met with in the Highlands. At Chilliteracy, on the Sound of Mull and looking over to the mainland of Morven, there was an inn with an innkeeper who was a MacLean, it appeared, of a very high family. For to keep an inn is thought even more genteel in the Highlands than it is with us, perhaps as partaking of hospitality, or perhaps because the trade is idle and drunken. He spoke good English, and finding me to be something of a scholar, tried me first in French, where he easily beat me, and then in the Latin, in which I don't know which of us did best. This pleasant rivalry put us at once upon friendly terms, and I sat up and drank punch with him, or to be more correct, sat up and watched him drink it, until he was so tipsy that he wept upon my shoulder. I tried him as if by accident with a sight of Allen's button, but it was plain he had never seen or heard of it. Indeed, he bore some grudge against the family and friends of Ardshiel, and before he was drunk he read me a lampoon in very good Latin, but with a very ill meaning, which he had made in elegiac verses upon a person of that house. When I told him of my catechist, he shook his head and said I was lucky to have got clear off. "That is a very dangerous man," he said. "Duncan Mackay is his name. He can shoot by the ear at several yards, and has been often accused of highway robberies and once of murder." "The cream of it," says I, "that he called himself a catechist." "And why should he not?" says he, "when that is what he is. It was the MacLean of Duart gave it to him because he was blind. But perhaps it was a pity," says my host, "for he is always on the road, going from one place to another to hear the young folks say their religion, and doubtless that is a great temptation to the poor man." At last, when my landlord could drink no more, he showed me to bed, and I lay down in very good spirits, having travelled the greater part of that big and crooked island of Mull, from Erid to Chilliteracy, 50 miles as the crow flies, and, with my wanderings, much nearer 100, in 4 days and with little fatigue. Indeed, I was by far in better heart and health of body at the end of that long tramp than I had been at the beginning. Chapter 16. The Lad with the Silver Button across Morven. There is a regular ferry from Chilliteracy to Kinlochaline on the mainland. Both shores of the Sound are in the country of the strong clan of the MacLeans, and the people that passed the ferry with me were almost of that clan. The skipper of the boat, on the other hand, was called Neil Roy MacRob, and since MacRob was one of the names of Allen's clansmen, and Allen himself had sent me to that ferry, I was eager to come to private speech of Neil Roy. In the crowded boat this was of course impossible, and the passage was a very slow affair. There was no wind, and as the boat was wretchedly equipped, we could pull but 2 oars on one side and 2 on the other. The men gave way, however, with a good will, the passengers taking spells to help them, and the whole company giving the time in Gaelic boat songs. And what with the songs, and the sea air, and the good nature and spirit of all concerned, and the bright weather, the passage was a pretty thing to have seen. But there was one melancholy part. In the mouth of Loch Alleen we found a great sea-going ship at anchor, and this, I supposed, at first was to be one of the king's cruisers which were kept along that coast, both summer and winter, to prevent communication with the French. As we got a little nearer, it became plain she was a ship of merchandise, and what still more puzzled me, not only her decks, but the sea beach also, were quite black with people, and skiffs were continually plying to and fro between them. Yet nearer, and there began to come to our ears a great sound of mourning, the people on board and those on the shore crying and lamenting one to another so as to pierce the heart. Then I understood this was an emigrant ship bound for the American colonies. We put the ferry boat alongside, and the exiles leaned over the bulwarks, weeping and reaching out their hands to my fellow passengers, among whom they counted some near friends. How long this might have gone on I do not know, for they seemed to have no sense of time. But at last the captain of the ship, who seemed near beside himself, and no great wonder, in the midst of this crying and confusion, came to the side and begged us to depart. Thereupon Neil sheered off, and the chief singer in our boat struck into a melancholy air, which was presently taken up both by the emigrants and their friends upon the beach, so that it sounded from all sides like a lament for the dying. I saw the tears run down the cheeks of the men and women in the boat, even as they bent at the oars, and the circumstances and the music of the song, which is one called Lochaber no more, were highly affecting even to myself. At Kinlochaline I got Neil Roy upon one side of the beach, and said I made sure he was one of Appin's men. "And what for no?" said he. "I am seeking somebody," said I, "and it comes to my mind that you will have news of him. Alan Breck Stewart is his name." And very foolishly, instead of showing him the button, I sought to pass a shilling in his hand. At this he drew back. "I am very much affronted," he said, "and this is not the way that one gentleman should behave to another. The man you ask for is in France, but if he was in Sporran, says he, and your belly full of shillings, I'd not hurt a hair upon his body." I saw I had gone the wrong way to work, and without wasting time upon apologies, showed him the button lying in the hollow of my palm. "Well, well," said Neil, "and I think you might have begun with that end of the stick, whatever. But if ye are the lad with the silver button, all is well, and I have the word to see that ye come safe. But if you will pardon me to speak plainly," says he, "there is a name that you should never take into your mouth, and that is the name of Alan Breck. And there is a thing that you would never do, and that is to offer your dirty money to a Highland gentleman." It was not very easy to apologize, for I could scarce tell him what was the truth, that I had never dreamed he would set up to be a gentleman until he told me so. Neil, on his part, had no wish to prolong his dealings with me, only to fulfill his orders and be done with it, and he made haste to give me my route. This was to lie the night in Kinlochaline in the public inn, to cross Morven the next day to Ardgour, and lie the night in the house of one John of the Claymore, who was warned that I might come. The third day to be set across one loch at Curran and another at Ballachalish, and then ask my way to the house of James of the Glens at Ochan in Duro of Appin. There was a good deal of ferrying, as you hear, the sea in all this part running deep into the mountains and winding about their roots. It makes the country strong to hold and difficult to travel, but full of prodigious, wild and dreadful prospects. I had some other advice from Neil, to speak with no one by the way, to avoid Whigs, Campbells, and the Red Soldiers, to leave the road and lie in a bush if I saw any of the latter coming, but it was never chancy to meet in with them. And in brief, to conduct myself like a robber or a Jacobite agent, as perhaps Neil thought me. The inn at Kinlochaline was the most beggarly, vile place that ever pigs were stayed in, full of smoke, vermin, and silent Highlanders. I was not only discontented with my lodging, but with myself for my mismanagement of Neil, and thought I could hardly be worse off. But very wrongly, and as I was soon to see, for I had not been half an hour at the inn, standing in the door most of the time to ease my eyes from the peat smoke, when a thunderstorm came close by. The springs broke in a little hill on which the inn stood, and one end of the house became a running water. Places of public entertainment were bad enough all over Scotland in those days, yet it was a wonder to myself when I had to go from the fireside to the bed in which I slept, wading over the shoes. Early in my next day's journey I overtook a little, stout, solemn man walking very slowly with his toes turned out, sometimes reading in a book, and sometimes marking the place with his finger, and dressed decently and plainly in something of a clerical style. This I found to be another catechist, but of a different order from the blind man of Mull, being indeed one of those sent out by the Edinburgh Society for propagating Christian knowledge to evangelize the more savage places of the Highlands. His name was Henderland. He spoke with the broad south country tongue, which I was beginning to weary for the sound of, and besides common countryship, we soon found we had a more particular bond of interest. For my good friend, the minister of Essendine, had translated into the Gaelic in his by-time a number of hymns and pious books which Henderland used in his work, and held in great esteem. Indeed, it was one of these he was carrying in reading when we met. We fell in company at once, our ways lying together as far as to Kingeloch. As we went, he stopped and spoke with all the wayfarers and workers that we met or passed, and though of course I could not tell what they discoursed about, yet I judged Mr. Henderland must be well liked in the countryside, for I observed many of them to bring out their mulls and share a pinch of snuff with him. I told him as far in my affairs as I judged wise, as far, that is, as they were none of Alan's, and gave Ballacolish as the place I was travelling to meet a friend, for I thought Ochan, or even Duror, would be too particular and might put him on the scent. On his part, he told me much of his work and the people he works among, the hiding priests and Jacobites, the disarming act, the dress, and many other curiosities of the time and place. He seemed moderate, blaming Parliament in several points, and especially because they had framed the Act more severely against those who wore the dress than those who carried weapons. This moderation put in my mind to question him of the Red Fox and the Appin tenants, questions which, I thought, would seem natural enough in the mouth of one travelling to the country. He said it was a bad business. "That's wonderful," said he, "where the tenants find the money, but their life is mere starvation. You don't carry such a thing as snuff, do ye, Mr. Balfour? No? Well, I'm better wanting it. But these tenants, as I was saying, are doubtless partly driven to it. James Stewart in Duror, that's him they call James of the Glens, is half-brother to Ardshiel, the captain of the clan, and he is a man much looked up to and drives very hard. And then there's one they call Alan Breck." "Ah!" cried I, "what of him?" "What of the wind that bloweth where it listeth?" said Henderland. "He's here and away, here today and gone tomorrow, a fair-heather cat. He might be glowering at the two of us out of yon wind bush, and I wouldn't wonder. But no carry such thing as snuff, will ye?" I told him no, and that he had asked the same thing more than once. "That's highly possible," said he, sighing, "but it seems strange you shouldn't carry it. However, as I was saying, this Alan Breck is a bold, desperate customer, and well kent to be James's right hand. His life is forfeit already, He would bogle at naething, and maybe if a tenant body was to hang back, he'd get a dog in his wame. You make a poor story of it all, Mr. Henderland, said I. If it is all fair upon both sides, I care to hear none of it. Nah, said Mr. Henderland, but there's love too, and self-denial that should put the like of you and me to shame. There's something fine about it. No perhaps Christian, but humanly fine. Even Alan Breck, by all that I hear, is a child to be respected. As many a lying sneckdraw sits close in kirk in our own part of the country, and stands well in the world's eye, and maybe is a far worse man, Mr. Balfour, than yon misguided shedder of man's blood. Aye, we might take a lesson by them. You'll perhaps think I've been too long in the Highlands, he added, smiling to me. I told him not at all, that I had seen much to admire among the Highlanders, and if he came to that, Mr. Campbell himself was a Highlander. Aye, said he, that's true. It's a fine blood. And what is it the King's agent? And what is the King's agent about? I asked. Colin Campbell, said Henderland, putting his head in a bee's bike. He is to turn the tenants out by force, I hear, said I. Yes, said he, but the business has gone back and forth as folks say. First, James of the Glens rode to Edinburgh and got some lawyer, a steward, nae doubt they all hing together like bats in a steeple, and had the proceedings stayed. And then Colin Campbell came in again and had the upper hand before the barons of Exchequer. And now they tell me the first of the tenants are to flit tomorrow. That's to begin at Duror under James's very windows, which doesn't seem wise by my humble way of it. Do you think they'll fight? I asked. Well, said Henderland, they're disarmed, or supposed to be, but there's still a good deal of cold iron lying by in quiet places. And then Colin Campbell has the sogers coming. But for all that, if I was his lady wife, I wouldn't be pleased till I got him home again. Your queer customers, the Appin Stewarts. I asked if they were worse than their neighbours. No, they, said he. That's the worst part of it. For if Colin Roy can get his business done in Appin, he has it all to begin again in the next country, which they call Mamor, and which is one of the countries of the Camerons. He's king's factor upon both, and from both has to drive out the tenants. And indeed, Mr. Balfour, to be open with you, it's my belief that if he escapes the one lot, he'll get his death by the other. So we continued talking and walking the great part of the day, until at last Mr. Henderland, after expressing his delight in my company and satisfaction at meeting with a friend of Mr. Campbell's, whom, says he, I will make bold to call that sweet singer of our covenanted Zion, proposed that I should make a short stage and lie the night in his house a little beyond King Loch. To say truth, I was overjoyed, for I had no great desire for John of the Claymore, and since my double misadventure, first with the guide and next with the gentleman skipper, I stood in some fear of any Highland stranger. Accordingly, we shook hands upon the bargain, and came in the afternoon to a small house standing alone by the shore of the Linney Loch. The sun was already gone from the desert mountains of Ardgour upon the hither side, but shone on those of Appin on the farther. The loch lay as still as a lake, only the gulls were crying round the sides of it, and the whole place seemed solemn and uncouth. We had no sooner come to the door of Mr. Henderland's dwelling than, to my great surprise, for I was now used to the politeness of Highlanders, he burst rudely past me, dashed into the room, caught up a jar and a small horn spoon, and began ladling snuff into his nose in most excessive quantities. Then he had a hearty fit of sneezing, and looked round upon me with a rather silly smile. That's a vow I took, says he. I took a vow upon me that I wouldn't carry it. Doubtless it's a great privation, but when I think upon the matters, not only to the Scottish Covenant, but to other points of Christianity, I think shame to mind it. As soon as we had eaten, and porridge and whey was the best of the good man's diet, he took a grave face and said he had a duty to perform by Mr. Campbell, and that was to inquire into my state of mind towards God. I was inclined to smile at him since the business of the snuff, but he had not spoken long before he brought the tears into my eyes. There are two things that men should never weary of: goodness and humility. We get none too much of them in this rough world, and among cold, proud people. But Mr. Henderland had their very speech upon his tongue, and though I was a good deal puffed up with my adventures, and with having come off, as the saying is, with flying colours, yet he soon had me on my knees beside a simple, poor old man, and both proud and glad to be there. Before we went to bed, he offered me sixpence to help me on my way out of a scanty store he kept in the turf wall of his house, at which excess of goodness I knew not what to do. But at last he was so earnest with me that I thought it the more mannerly to let him have his way, and so left him poorer than myself. Chapter 17. The Death of the Red Fox. The next day, Mr. Henderland found for me a man who had a boat of his own and was to cross the Linney Loch that afternoon into Appin, fishing. Him he prevailed on to take me, for he was one of his flock, and in this way I saved a long day's travel and the price of the 2 public ferries I must otherwise have passed. It was near noon before we set out, a dark day with clouds and the sun shining upon little patches. The sea was here very deep and still, and had scarce a wave upon it, so that I must put the water to my lips before I could believe it to be truly salt. The mountains on either side were high, rough, and barren, very black and gloomy in the shadow of the clouds, but all silver-laced with little watercourses where the sun shone upon them. It seemed a hard country, this of Appin, for people to care as much about as Alan did. There was but one thing to mention. A little after we had started, the sun shone upon a little moving clump of scarlet close in along the waterside to the north. It was much of the same red as soldiers' coats. Every now and then, too, there came little sparks and lightning, as though the sun had struck upon bright steel. I asked my boatman what it should be, and he answered he supposed it was some of the red soldiers coming from Fort William into Appin against the poor tenantry of the country. Well, it was a sad sight to me, and whether it was because of my thoughts of Alan, or from something prophetic in my bosom, although this was but the second time I had seen King George's troops, I had no good will to them. At last we came so near the point of land at the entering of Loch Leven that I begged to be set on shore. My boatman, who was an honest fellow and mindful of his promise to the catechist, would fain have carried me on to Ballachulish, but as this was to take me farther from my secret destination, I insisted and was set on shore at last under the woods of Lettermore, or Lettervore, for I have heard it both ways, in Alan's country of Appin. This was a wood of birches, growing on a steep, craggy side of a mountain that overhung the loch. It had many openings and ferny howes, and a road or bridle track ran north and south through the midst of it, by the edge of which, where was a spring, I sat down to eat some oat bread of Mr. Henderland's, and think upon my situation. Here I was not only troubled by a cloud of stinging midges, but far more by the doubts of my mind. What I ought to do, why I was going to join myself with an outlaw and a would-be murderer like Alan, whether I should not be acting more like a man of sense to tramp back to the south country direct, by my own guidance and at my own charges, and what Mr. Campbell or even Mr. Henderland would think of me if they should ever learn my folly and presumption. These were the doubts that now began to come in on me stronger than ever. As I was so sitting and thinking, a sound of men and horses came to me through the wood, and presently after, at a turning of the road, I saw 4 travellers come into view. The way was in this part so rough and narrow that they came single and led their horses by the reins. The first was a great red-headed gentleman of an imperious and flushed face, who carried his hat in his hand and fanned himself, for he was in a breathing heat. The second, by his decent black garb and white wig, I correctly took to be a lawyer. The third was a servant, and wore some part of his clothes in tartan, which showed that his master was of a Highland family, and either an outlaw or else in singular good odour with the government, since the wearing of tartan was against the act. If I had been better versed in these things, I would have known the tartan to be of the Argyle or Campbell colours. The servant had a good-sized portmanteau strapped on his horse, and a net of lemons to brew punch with hanging at the saddle-bow, as was often enough the custom with luxurious travellers in that part of the country. As for the fourth, who brought up the tale, I had seen his like before, and knew him at once to be a sheriff's officer. I had no sooner seen these people coming than I made up my mind, for no reason that I can tell, to go through with my adventure, and when the first came alongside of me, I rose up from the bracken and asked him the way to Ochan. He stopped and looked at me, as I thought, a little oddly, and then, turning to the lawyer, "Mungo," said he, "there's many a man would think this more of a warning than 2 piats. Here am I on my road to Durrell and the job you ken, and here is a young lad starts up out of the bracken and speers if I am on the way to Ochan." "Glenure," said the other, "this is an ill subject for jesting." These two had now drawn close up and were gazing at me, while the 2 followers had halted about a stone cast in the rear. "And what seek ye in Ochan?" said Colin Roy Campbell of Glenure. Him they called the Red Fox, for he it was that I had stopped. "The man that lives there," said I. "James of the Glens," says Glenure musingly, and then to the lawyer, "Is he gathering in his people, think ye?" "Anyway," says the lawyer, "we shall do better to bide where we are and let the soldiers rally us." "If ye are concerned for me," said I neither of his people nor yours, but an honest subject of King George, owing no man and fearing no man." "Why, very well," replies the factor, "but if I may make so bold as ask, what does this honest man so far from his country, and why does he come seeking the brother of Ardshiel? I have power here, I must tell ye. I am king's factor upon several of these estates, and have 12 files of soldiers at my back." "I've heard the waif word in the country," said I, a little nettled, "that you were a hard man to drive." He still kept looking at me, as if in doubt. "Well," said he, at last, "your tongue is bold, but I am no unfriend to plainness. If you had asked me the way to the door of James Stewart on any other day but this, I would have set ye right and bidden ye Godspeed. But today, Mungo?" And he turned again to look at the lawyer. But just as he turned, there came the shot of a firelock from higher up the hill, and with the very sound of it, Glenure fell upon the road. "Oh, I'm dead!" he cried several times over. The lawyer had caught him up and held him in his arms, the servant standing over and clasping his hands. And now the wounded man looked from one to another with scared eyes, and there was a change in his voice that went to the heart. "Take care of yourselves," says he. "I'm dead." He tried to open his clothes as if to look for the wound, but his fingers slipped on the buttons. With that, he gave a great sigh, his head rolled on his shoulder, and he passed away. The lawyer never said a word, but his face was as sharp as a pen and as white as the dead man's. The servant broke out into a great noise of crying and weeping like a child, and I, on my side, stood staring at them in a kind of horror. The sheriff's officer had run back at the first sound of the shot to hasten the coming of the soldiers. At last the lawyer laid down the dead man in his blood upon the road and got to his own feet with a kind of stagger. I believe it was his movement that brought me to my senses, for he had no sooner done so than I began to scramble up the hill, crying out, "The murderer! The murderer!" So little a time had elapsed that when I got to the top of the first steepness and could see some part of the open mountain, the murderer was still moving away at no great distance. He was a big man, in a black coat with metal buttons, and carried a long fowling piece. "Here!" I cried. "I see him!" At that the murderer gave a little quick look over his shoulder and began to run. The next moment he was lost in a fringe of birches, and he came out again on the upper side where I could see him climbing like a jackanapes, for that part was again very steep, and then he dipped behind a shoulder, and I saw him no more. All this time I had been running on my side and had got a good way up, when a voice cried upon me to stand. I was at the edge of the upper wood, and so now, when I halted and looked back, I saw all the open part of the hill below me. The lawyer and the sheriff's officer were standing just above the road, crying and waving on me to come back, and on their left the redcoats, musket in hand, were beginning to struggle singly out of the lower wood. "Why should I come back?" I cried. "Come on, you." £10 if you take that lad," cried the lawyer. "He's an accomplice. He was posted here to hold us in talk." At that word, which I could hear quite plainly, though it was to the soldiers and not to me that he was crying it, my heart came in my mouth with quite a new kind of terror. Indeed, it is one thing to stand the danger of your life, and quite another to run the peril of both life and character. The thing, besides, had come so suddenly, like thunder out of a clear sky, that I was all amazed and helpless. The soldiers began to spread, some of them to run, and others to put up their pieces and cover me, and still I stood. "Duke in here among the trees," said a voice close by. Indeed, I scarce knew what I was doing, but I obeyed, and as I did so I heard the firelocks bang and the balls whistle in the birches. Just inside the shelter of the trees, I found Alan Breck standing with a fishing rod. He gave me no salutation. Indeed, it was no time for civilities. Only, "Come," says he, and set off running along the side of the mountain towards Ballachulish, and I, like a sheep, to follow him. Now we ran among the birches, now stooping behind low humps upon the mountainside, now crawling on all fours among the heather. The pace was deadly. My heart seemed bursting against my ribs, and I had neither time to think nor breath to speak with. Only I remember seeing with wonder that Alan every now and then would straighten himself to his full height and look back, and every time he did so there came a great faraway cheering and crying of the soldiers. Quarter of an hour later, Alan stopped, clapped down flat in the heather, and turned to me. "No," said he, "it's honest. Do as I do for your life." And at the same speed, but now with infinitely more precaution, we traced back again across the mountainside by the same way that we had come, only perhaps higher, till at last Alan threw himself down in the upper wood of Lettermore, where I found him at the first, and lay with his face in the bracken, panting like a dog. My own sides so ached, my head so swam, my tongue so hung out of my mouth with heat and dryness, that I lay beside him like one dead. And with that, we reach the end of the chapter, and where we shall take a break for tonight. F indeed. We learn about the Red Fox, and then the Red Fox gets shot. That's it. Also, Billiam, hello, welcome in. I saw you sneak in there with a lurk just as I started, but it's lovely to see you. Hope you're doing well. Yeah, drama, exactly. The book doesn't let up. There's stuff happening all the time. But yeah, I'm gonna send you all out for 5 minutes. It's very political. It is, and like, I think I've talked about this in the past, that apparently this is where I find out if my mum's listening. I do apparently myself have some kind of Scottish heritage on her side, which honestly this is kind of making me interested to go and look into, because born and raised and lived my whole life in England. Great accent. Oh, thank you. I'm honestly extremely self-conscious about it. Like, it's not speech that I can read not in Scottish, so I was like, well, I guess I'm going to have to do this. It's one that, like, as I'm doing it, it sounds mostly... There's a few times, like, it slips, and there's a few things I had to, like, try and practice and, like, get better at, like, pronunciations and stuff. But then there's a couple of times on the VOD when I'm uploading it to YouTube, I hear it back and go, ooh, that just sounds like an extremely middle-class guy from Oxford attempting to do a Scottish accent that he heard on the TV one time. So yeah, thank you. It's fun. I'm enjoying reading it. But yeah, as I say, like I've got seemingly some sort of Scottish heritage, and this is making me interested to go and like actually kind of look back, see. You wanted. I'm dead to sound like Groundskeeper Willie. Oh no. Now I'm actively not going to try to think of that, because if I get that in my head, that's what you're going to hear. Oh no. But yeah, I'd be interested to actually see like what further back down my family tree where that intersects with like this particular timeline and the whole, Jacobite rebellion and yeah, this kind of thing. No, I don't apologise. It's all good. Right. Anyway, 5 minutes. Go take a break, move around if you can, refill fluids, stroke a cat, or whatnot, and yeah, see you back here in about 5 minutes or so, friends. Bye for now. And we're back. Hello. Welcome back to the second half of this. I hope that everyone's well and just making the most of this incredibly noisy seat, which I need to replace at some point. But, you know, we'll get around to that eventually. Yeah, hello, welcome back. I hope everyone's well and had a worthwhile and fulfilling break as required. Thank you. Yeah. I guess I'll do that for a minute. Ray Tracer, hello, welcome. Just to let people filter back in, because, you know, we say 5 minutes and sometimes breaks go on a little bit longer than that, so, you know, people have got stuff to do. But yeah, hope you're all doing well, and whatever point in the weekend it is for you, that it's being a good one. Yeah, what do I have anything else to discuss, really? Or after saying let's do it for a minute, then shall I just go straight into the next part? You had a lot of excitement because there was a big wild turkey outside. Ooh, Christmas has come early. Wonderful. Okay. That's, yeah, I mean, I can relate, kind of, when there's a fox in the garden here. I mean, there's chickens which don't appreciate a fox being around, so, you know, we try to keep them separate, but it's kind of exciting because there's a fox that has basically taken up residence in the garden here, and you just see it just curled up asleep. Again, the classic, like, cat software, dog hardware thing. You sort of see these behaviours like it is just like someone installed a cat on a dog, and it just sits in the back, just curled up, sleeping, stretching, looking at people as they go past, like, oh hi, are we cool? Are we chill? Okay, fine, and then go back to sleep. Yeah, exactly. Are you able to ride the turkey like a chocobo? That's an important question. Friendly fox, it'll eat all the livestock. We've had that happen in the past. That's why generally we try to, keep the chickens safe and chase the foxes away. But they've started just not caring. But there's, like, you know, there's only a couple of chickens left, in part due to the interventions of foxes, and in part just the passage of time. Like, they're old chickens by now anyway. There was a fox that lived in your college campus. It was good luck to spot him before an exam. Nice. People just running around looking for foxes. Just around there, live on fast food. To be honest, I don't know, if not, like, kept chickens, I don't know what the ones around here live on, because it's not like in a city, but it's not a particularly, this is not a rural area. It's, I guess, broadly suburban. And so, yeah, like, I don't really know what foxes are eating around here. I guess they're just, like, rummaging through bins and just digging through food waste bins and stuff like that. Yeah, but I don't know. Clearly they're doing okay. I think they eat mice and things. Yeah, maybe. And there's rats around here, I guess. So, yeah, possibly, like, vermin and stuff. I don't know. But yeah, it's, you know, it's exciting. You'll just hear them screaming in the night or scrabbling over fences, and it sounds like someone's being killed or a burglary happening, but it's neither. It's foxes. So yeah, that's a good one. Anyway, dramatic indeed, exactly. But, you know, I don't want to go on too much further and end up somehow doxing myself, like, oh, this guy lives in a place where there's foxes. I've got that. I know where he is. So yeah. Shall we have some more of a story? The rest of it? Well, I mean, yeah, the rest of the whole story if you want. I'm not reading the rest of the story right now, just another couple of chapters. There's linked at the top of chat there if you would like to click on that or not. It's your choice. Exactly, back to Jacobite interaction. Which, yeah, I'm like, hands up, gonna confess, I'm pretty ignorant on how this thing actually played out in history. There's a word I keep using, in the book, and I'm pronouncing it wrong, or Like a sect. Wait, what? Hang on. I'm confused, but I'll let you explain what I'm being asked here in a sec. Yeah, I'm quite ignorant on the history of all this, like the time period in which it's set, and who are the real characters, like actual authentic people. Oh, at least 2 characters have been described as something beginning with a C. Yes, the catechist. Catechist, which is one that I looked up earlier, and to check the pronunciation, because I wasn't sure if it's catechist or catechist. And I think I found an American pronunciation, which was catechist, and like a more kind of Irish and Scottish pronunciation, which was more along the lines of catechist. So that's the one I went with. I might be wrong, Andy Pants. I think I looked up a couple others as well, but it's definitely a hard C. Okay, then maybe I'm wrong. Maybe for the first time in my life I'm just doing America dirty. I don't know. I apologise. Hands up. That's on me. My bad. I apologise. But yeah, I don't think I've encountered it exactly like that before. I feel like I've encountered like derivations of that word, like it's used in other forms. But this, I think, is like the first time, certainly the first time I've read it aloud and had to look how to pronounce it. But yeah, it's like a religious teacher or something. Catechism is religious teaching, specifically Catholic thing. Okay, cool. Yeah. Because like that's sort of what I inferred from the way that it's handled in the book, like with the guy going, the blind guy with the gun going, yes, I'm a catechist, and David being like, really? You don't seem like it, but okay, sure, and sort of just saying like, it doesn't really line up with my ideas of a religious teacher. Books help you learn. I know, me too, frankly. I'm learning all sorts of things. For one, about Scottish Rebellion, and yeah. But anyway, yeah. Should we carry on? Should we have some more story? Let us. I'm really thirsty this evening. Do excuse if there's probably going to be slurping sounds picked up by the mic. I'm going to try to keep them off it, but you know that's going to happen, and I apologise. Yeah, let's carry on. We are at. We'll be showing buttons before shillings. Exactly. Like, yeah, offer a button first. Try this in co-op, Tesco, you know, show them a button, and then present your card. Yes, we are at chapter 18. I talk with Alan in the wood of Lettermore. Alan was the first to come round. He rose, went to the border of the wood, peered out a little, and then returned and sat down. "Well," said he, "yon was a hot bus, David?" I said nothing, nor so much as lifted my face. I had seen murder done, and a great, ruddy, jovial gentleman struck out of life in a moment. The pity of that sight was still sore within me, and yet that was but a part of my concern. Here was murder done upon the man Alan hated. Here was Alan, skulking in the trees and running from the troops, and whether his was the hand that fired or only the head that ordered signified but little. By my way of it, the only friend in that wild country was blood guilty in the first degree. I held him in horror. I could not look upon his face. I would have rather lain alone in the rain on my cold isle than in that warm wood beside a murderer. "Are you still wearied?" he asked again. "No," said I, still with my face in the bracken. "No, I'm not wearied now, and I can speak. You and me must twain," I said. "I like you very well, Alan, but your ways are not mine, and they're not God's, and in the short and the long of it is just that we must twain." "I would hardly twain from you, David," without some kind of reason for the same, said Alan, mighty gravely. If you ken anything against my reputation, it's the least thing that you should do, for old acquaintance sake, to let me hear the name of it. And if you have only taken a distaste to my society, it will be proper for me to judge if I'm insulted. Alan, said I, what is the sense of this? Ye ken very well yon Campbell man lies in his blood upon the road. He was silent for a little. Then he says, Did ye ever hear tell of the story of the man and the good people? By which he meant the fairies. No, said I, nor do I want to hear it. With your permission, Mr. Balfour, I will tell it you, whatever, says Alan. The man, ye should ken, was cast upon a rock in the sea, where it appears the good people were in use to come, and the rest as they went through to Ireland. The name of this rock is called the Skerry Vore, and it's not far from where we suffered shipwreck. Well, it seems the man cried so sore, if he could just see his little bairn before he died, that at last the king of the good people took pity upon him, and sent one flying that brought back the bairn in a poke, and laid it down beside the man where he was sleeping. So when the man woke, there was a poke beside him, and something into the inside of it that moved. Well, it seems he was one of these gentry that think the worst of things. For the greater security, he stuck his duck through that poke before he opened it, and there was his bairn dead. I'm thinking to myself, Mr. Balfour, that you and the man are very much alike. Do you mean you had no hand in it? Cried I, sitting up. I will tell you first of all, Mr. Balfour of Shaw's, as one friend to another, said Alan, that if I were going to kill a gentleman, it would not be in my own country, to bring trouble on my clan, and I would not go wanting sword and gun, and with a long fishing rod upon my back. Well, said I, that's true. And now, continued Alan, taking out his dirk and laying his hand upon it in a certain manner, I swear upon the holy iron I had neither art nor art nor part, axe nor thought in it. I thank God for that, cried I, and offered him my hand. He did not appear to see it. And here is a great deal of work about a Campbell, said he. Ye are not so scarce that I ken. At least, said I, you cannot justly blame me, for you know very well what you told me in the brig. But the temptation and the act are different, I thank God for that. We may all be tempted, but to take a life in cold blood, Alan. And I could say no more for the moment. And do you know who did it? I added. You know the man in the black coat. I have nae clear mind about that coat, said Alan, cunningly. But it sticks in my head that it was blue. Blue or black, did you know him? Said I. I could nae just conscientiously swear to him, says Alan. He gaed very close by me, but to be sure, but it's a strange thing that I should have just been tying my brogues. Can you swear that you don't know him, Alan? I cried, half angered, half in a mind to laugh at his evasions. Not yet, says he, but I've a grand memory for forgetting, David. And yet there was one thing I saw clearly, said I, and that was that you exposed yourself to me, so you exposed yourself and me to draw the soldiers. That's very likely, said Alan, and so would any gentleman. You and me were innocent of that transaction. The better reason, since we were falsely suspected, that we should get clear, I cried. The innocent should surely come before the guilty. Why, David, said he, the innocent have a chance to get a soiled in court, but for the lad that shot the bullet, I think the best place for him will be the heather. Them that have nae dipped their hands in any little difficulty should be very mindful of the case of them that have, and that is the good Christianity. But if it was the other way round about, and the lad whom I could nae just clearly see had been in our shoes and we in his, as might very well have been, I would think we would be a good deal obliged to him ourselves if he would draw the soldiers. When it came to this, I gave Alan up. But he looked so innocent all the time, and was in such clear good faith in what he said, and so ready to sacrifice himself for what he deemed his duty, that my mouth was closed. Mr. Henderland's words came back to me, that we ourselves might take a lesson by these wild Highlanders. Well, here I had taken mine. Alan's morals were all tail first, but he was ready to give his life for them, such as they were. "Alan," said I, "I'll not say it's the good Christianity as I understand it, but it's good enough, and here I offer you my hand for the second time." Whereupon he gave me both of his, saying surely I had cast a spell upon him, or he could forgive me anything. Then he grew very grave, and said we had not much time to throw away, but must both flee that country. He, because he was a deserter, and the whole of Appin would now be searched like a chamber, and every one obliged to give a good account of himself, and I, because I was certainly involved in the murder. "Oh," says I, willing to give him a little lesson, "I have no fear at the justice of my country." "As if this was your country," said he, "or as if you were betrayed here in a country of Stuarts." "That's all Scotland," said I. "Man, I whiles wonder at ye," said Alan. "This is a Campbell that's been killed. Well, it'll be tried in Inverara, the Campbell's head police, with 15 Campbells in the jury box, and the biggest Campbell of all, and that's the Duke, sitting cocking on the bench. Justice, David. The same justice by all the world as Glenure found a while ago at the roadside." This frightened me a little, I confess, and would have frightened me more if I had known how nearly exact were Alan's predictions. Indeed, it was but in one point that he exaggerated, there being but 11 Campbells on the jury. Though, as the other 4 were equally in the Duke's dependence, it mattered less than might appear. Still, I cried out that he was unjust to the Duke of Argyle, who, for all he was a Whig, was yet a wise and honest nobleman. "Hoot," said Alan, "the man's a Whig, nae doubt. I would never deny he was a good chieftain to his clan. And what would the clan think if there was a Campbell shot and naebody hanged, and their own chief their Justice General? But I have often observed," says Alan, "that you low country bodies have no clear idea of what's right and wrong." At this I did at last laugh out aloud, when, to my surprise, Alan joined in and laughed as merrily as myself. "Nah," said he. "We're in the Highlands, David, and when I tell you to run, take my word and run. Nae doubt it's a hard thing to skulk and starve in the heather, but it's harder yet to lie shackled in the Red Coat prison." I asked him whither we should flee, and as he told me to the Lowlands, I was a little better inclined to go with him. For indeed I was growing impatient to get back and have the upper hand of my uncle. Besides, Alan made so sure that there would be no question of justice in the matter, that I began to be afraid he might be right. Of all deaths, I would truly least like to die by the gallows, and the picture of that uncanny instrument came into my head with extraordinary clearness, as I had once seen it engraved at the top of a pedlar's ballad, and took away my appetite for courts of justice. "I'll chance it, Alan," said I. "I'll go with you." "But mind you," said Alan, "it's no small thing. You maun lie bare and hard, and brook many an empty belly. Your bed shall be the moorcocks, and your life shall be like the hunted deers, and you shall sleep with your hand upon your weapons. Aye, man, you shall tail many a weary foot, or we'll get clear. I tell ye this at the start, for it's a life that I ken well. If ye ask what other chance ye have, I answer, nane. Either take to the heather with me, or else hang." "And that's a choice very easily made," said I, and we shook hands upon it. "And now let's take another keek at the redcoats," says Alan, and he led me to the northeastern fringe of the wood. Looking out between the trees, we could see a great side of mountain, running down exceeding steep into the waters of the loch. It was a rough part, all hanging stone and heather and bit scrags of birchwood. And away at the far end towards Balachalish, little wee red soldiers were dipping up and down over hill and howe and growing smaller every minute. There was no cheering now, for I think they had other uses for what breath was left them. but they still stuck to the trail, and doubtless thought that we were close in front of them. Alan watched them, smiling to himself. "Aye," said he, "they'll be gey weary before they got down to the end of that employ. And so you and me, David, can sit down and eat a bite, and breathe a bit longer, and take a dram from my bottle. Then we'll strike for Auchan, the house of my kinsman James of the Glens, where I must get my clothes and my arms and money to carry us along. And then, David, we'll cry forth fortune, and take a cast among the heather." So we sat again, and ate and drank, in a place whence we could see the sun going down into a field of great, wild, and houseless mountains, such as I was now condemned to wander in with my companion. Partly as we so sat, and partly afterwards on the way to Auchan, each of us narrated his adventures, and I shall here set down so much of Alan's as seems either curious or needful. It appears he ran to the bulwarks as soon as the wave was past, saw me and lost me and saw me again, as I tumbled in the roost, and at last had one glimpse of me clinging on the yard. It was this that put him in some hope I would maybe get to land after all, and made him leave those clues and messages which had brought me, for my sins, to that unlucky country of Appin. In the meanwhile, those still on the brig had got the skiff launched, and 1 or 2 were on board of her already, when there came a second wave greater than the first, and heaved the brig out of her place, and would certainly have sent her to the bottom, had she not struck and caught on some projection of the reef. When she had struck first, it had been bows on, so that the stern had hitherto been lowest. But now her stern was thrown in the air, and the bows plunged under the sea, and with that the water began to pour into the forescuttle like the pouring of a mill dam. It took the colour out of Alan's face even to tell what followed, for there were still 2 men lying impotent in their bunks, and these, seeing the water pour in and thinking the ship had foundered, begun to cry out aloud, and that with such harrowing cries that all who were on deck tumbled one after another into the skiff and fell to their oars. They were not 200 yards away when there came a third great sea, and at that the brig lifted clean over the reef. Her canvas filled for a moment, and she seemed to sail in chase of them, but settling all the while, and presently she drew down and down as if a hand was drawing her, and the sea closed over the Covenant of Dysart. Never a word they spoke as they pulled ashore, being stunned with the horror of that screaming. But they had scarce set foot upon the beach when Hoseason woke up, as if out of a muse, and bade them lay hands upon Alan. They hung back, indeed, having little taste for the employment. But Hoseason was like a fiend, crying that Alan was alone, that he had a great sum about him, that he had been the means of losing the brig and drowning all their comrades, and that here was both revenge and wealth upon a single cast. It was 7 against 1. In that part of the shore there was no rock that Alan could set his back to, and the sailors began to spread out and come behind him. "And then," said Alan, "the little man with the red head, I haven't minded the name that he is called." "Riach," said I. "Aye," said Alan, "Riach. Well, it was him that took up the clubs for me, asked the men if they weren't afeard of a judgment, and says he, 'Dod, I'll put my head to the Highlandman's mysel'.' So I'll put my back to the Highlandman's mysel'. I don't know where that came from. That's none such an entirely bad little man, young little man with the red head," said Alan. "He has some spunks of decency." "Well," said I, "he was kind to me in his way." "And so he was to Alan," said he, "and by my troth I found his way a very good one. But you see, David, the loss of the ship and the cries of these poor lads sat very ill upon the man, and I'm thinking that would be the cause of it." "Well, I would think so," says I, "but he was as keen as any of the rest at the beginning. But how did Hoseason take it?" "It sticks in my mind that he would take it very ill," says Alan, "but the little man cried to me to run, and indeed I thought it was a good observe, and ran. The last that I saw, they were all in a knot upon the beach, like folk that were not agreeing very well together. What do you mean by that? Said I. Well, the fists were going, said Alan, and I saw one man go down like a pair of breeks. But I thought it would be better not to wait. You see, there's a strip of Campbell's at the end of Mull, which is no good company for a gentleman like me. If it hadn't been for that, I would have waited and looked for it myself. So I looked for ye myself, let alone giving a hand to the little man. It was droll how Alan dwelt on Mr. Rietch's stature, for, to say the truth, the one was not much smaller than the other. So, says he, continuing, I set my best foot forward, and whenever I met with anyone, I cried out there was a wreck ashore. Man, they didn't stop to fash with me. You should have seen them linking for the beach. And when they got there, they found they had had the pleasure of a run, which is good for a Campbell. And I'm thinking it was a judgment on the clan that the brig went down in a lump and didn't break. But it was a very unlucky thing for you, that same. For if any wreck had come ashore, they would have hunted high and low, and would soon have found you. Chapter 19. The House of Fear. Night fell as we were walking, and the clouds, which had broken up in the afternoon, settled in and thickened, so that it fell, for the season of the year, extremely dark. The way we went was over rough mountain-sides, and though Alan pushed on with an assured manner, I could by no means see how he directed himself. At last, about 10:30 of the clock, we came to the top of a brae, and saw lights below us. It seemed the house door stood open and let out a beam of fire and candlelight, and all round the house and steading 5 or 6 persons were moving hurriedly about, each carrying a lighted brand. James must have tint his wits, said Alan. If this was the soldiers instead of you and me, it would be in a bonny mess. But I dare say he'll have a sentry on the road, and he would ken well enough no soldiers would find the way that we came. Hereupon he whistled 3 times in a particular manner. It was strange to see how, at the first sound of it, all the moving torches came to a stand, as if the bearers were affrighted, and how, at the third, the bustle began again as before. Having thus set folks' minds at rest, we came down the brae, and were met at the yard gate, for this place was like a well-doing farm, by a tall, handsome man more than 50, who cried aloud to Alan in the Gaelic. "James Stewart," said Alan, "I will ask you to speak in Scotch, for here is a young gentleman with me that has none of the other. This is him," he added, putting his arm through mine, "a young gentleman of the Lowlands, and a laird in his country too, but I am thinking it will be better for his health if we give his name the go-by." James of the Glens turned to me for a moment and greeted me courteously enough. The next he had turned to Alan. "This has been a dreadful accident," he cried. "It will bring trouble to the country." And he wrung his hands. "Hoots," said Alan, "you must take the soul of the sweet man. Colin Roy is dead, and be thankful for that." "Aye," said James, "and by my troth I wish he was alive again. It's all very fine to blow and boast beforehand, but now it's done, Alan. And who's to bear the weight of it? The accident fell out in Appin. Mind ye that, Alan. It's Appin that must pay, and I'm a man that has a family." While this was going on, I looked about me at the servants. Some were on ladders, digging in the thatch of the house or the farm buildings, from which they brought out guns, swords, and different weapons of war. Others carried them away, and by the sound of mattock blows from somewhere further down the brae, I suppose they buried them. Though they were all so busy, there prevailed no kind of order in their efforts. Men struggled together for the same gun, and ran into each other with their burning torches, and James was continually turning about from his talk with Alan to cry out orders which were apparently never understood. The faces in the torchlight were like those of people overborne with hurry and panic, and though none spoke above his breath, their speech sounded both anxious and angry. It was about this time that a lassie came out of the house carrying a pack or bundle. and it has often made me smile to think how Alan's instinct awoke at the mere sight of it. "What's that the lassie has?" he asked. "We're just setting the house in order, Alan," said James in his frightened and somewhat fawning way. "There'll such happen with candles, and we must have all these things sweet. We're digging the bit guns and swords into the moss, you see, and these, I'm thinking, will be your own French clothes." "Bury my French clothes!" cried Alan. "Doth no." And he laid hold upon the packet and retired into the barn to shift himself, recommending me in the meanwhile to his kinsman. James carried me accordingly into the kitchen and sat down with me at table, smiling and talking at first in a very hospitable manner. But presently the gloom returned upon him. He sat, frowning and biting his fingers, only remembered me from time to time, and then gave me but a word or two and a poor smile, and back to his private terrors. His wife sat by the fire and wept, with her face in her hands. His eldest son was crouched upon the floor, running over a great mass of papers, and now and again setting one alight and burning it to the bitter end. All the while, a servant lass with a red face was rummaging about the room, in a blind hurry of fear, and whimpering as she went, and every now and again one of the men would thrust in his face from the yard and cry for orders. At last James could keep his seat no longer, and begged my permission to be so unmannerly as walk about. "I am but poor company altogether, sir," says he, "but I can think of nothing but this dreadful accident, and the trouble it is like to bring upon quite innocent persons." A little after he observed his son burning a paper, which he thought should have been kept, and at that his excitement burst out so that it was painful to witness. He struck the lad repeatedly. "Are you gone gate?" he cried. "Do you wish to hang your father?" And forgetful of my presence, carried on at him a long time together in the Gaelic, the young man answering nothing. Only the wife, at the name of hanging, throwing her apron upon her face and sobbing out louder than before. This was all wretched for a stranger like myself to hear and see, and I was right glad when Alan returned, looking like himself in his fine French clothes, though, to be sure, they were now grown almost too battered and withered to deserve the name of fine. I was then taken out in my turn by another of the sons, and given that change of clothing of which I had stood so long in need, and a pair of Highland brogues made of deer leather, rather strange at first, but after a little practice, very easy to the feet. By the time I came back, Alan must have told his story. For it seemed I'll start again. By the time I came back, Alan must have told his story, for it seemed understood that I was to fly with him, and they were all busy upon our equipment. They gave us each a sword and pistols, though I professed my inability to use the former, and with these, and some ammunition, a bag of oatmeal, an iron pan, and a bottle of right French brandy, we were ready for the heather. Money, indeed, was lacking. I had about 2 guineas left. Alan's belt having been dispatched by another hand, that trusty messenger had no more than 17 pence to his whole fortune. And as for James, it appears he had brought himself so low with journeys to Edinburgh and legal expenses on behalf of the tenants that he could only scrape together 3 and 5 pence halfpenny, the most of it in coppers. "That'll no do," said Alan. "You must find a safe bit somewhere nearby," said James, "and get word sent to me. You see, you'll have to get this business prettily off, Alan. This is no time to be stayed for a guinea or two. They're sure to get wind of you, sure to seek you, and by my way of it sure to lay on you the weight of this day's accident. If it falls on you, it falls on me that I'm your near kinsman and harboured ye while ye were in the country. And if it comes on me—" He paused and bit his fingers with a white face. "It would be a painful thing for our friends if I was to hang," said he. "It would be an ill day for Appin," says Alan. "That's the day that sticks in my throat," said James. "Oh, man. Alan, you and me have spoken like two fools," he cried, striking his hand upon the wall so that the house rang again. "Well, and that's true too," said Alan, "and my friend from the Lowlands here," nodding at me, gave me a good word upon that head, if I would only have listened to him. But see here, said James, returning to his former manner, if they lay me by the heels, Alan, it's then that you'll be needing the money. But with all that I have said, and that you have said, it will look very black against the two of us. Do you mark that? Well, follow me out, and you'll see that I'll have to get the paper out against you myself. I'll have to offer a reward for you. Aye, will I. It's a sore thing to do between such near friends, but if I get the dirdom of this dreadful accident, I'll have to fend for myself, man. Do you see that? 1 second, I can hear cats. No, I don't hear cats. I'm hallucinating cats. I'm confused, but okay. An absence of cats is what I hear. Good. Right. Let's carry on. He spoke with a pleading earnestness, taking Alan by the breast of the coat. Aye, said Alan. I see that. And you'll have to be clear of the country, Alan. Aye, and clear of Scotland. You and your friend from the Lowlands too. Or I'll have to paper your friend from the Lowlands. You see that, Alan? Say that you see that. I thought Alan flushed a bit. That's his uncle hard on me that's brought him here, James, said he, throwing his head back. It's like making me a tater. No, Alan, man, cried James. Look things in the face. He'll be papered anyway. Mungo Campbell will be sure to paper him. What matters if I paper him too? And then, Alan, I'm both man. Then, Alan, I'm a man that has a family. And then, after a little pause on both sides, and, Alan, it'll be a jury of Campbells, said he. There's one thing, said Alan musingly, that nobody kens his name. Nor yet they shan't, Alan. There's my hand on that, cried James, for all the world as if he had really known my name and was foregoing some advantage. But just the habit he was in, and what he looked like and his age and the like, I couldn't well do less. I wonder at your father's son, cried Alan sternly. Would ye sell the lad with a gift? Would ye change his clothes and then betray him? No, Alan, said James. No, the habit he took off, the habit Mungo saw him in. But I thought he seemed crestfallen indeed. He was clutching at every straw, and all the time, I dare say, saw the faces of his hereditary foes on the beach, and in the jury box, and the gallows in the background. Well, sir, said Alan, turning to me, what say ye to that? Ye are here, under the safeguard of my honour, and it's part to see nothing done but what shall please you. It's my part to see nothing done but what shall please you. I have but one word to say, said I. For to all this dispute I am a perfect stranger. But the plain common sense is to set the blame where it belongs, and that is on the man that fired the shot. Paper him, as you call it. Set the hunt on him, and let honest innocent folks show their faces in safety. But at this both Alan and James cried out in horror, bidding me hold my tongue, for that was not to be thought of, and asking me what the Camerons would think, which confirmed me it must have been a Cameron from Mamor that did the act. And if I did not see that the lad might be caught, ye haven't surely thought of that, said they, with such innocent earnestness that my hands dropped at my side, and I despaired of argument. Very well then, said I. Paper me, if you please. Paper Alan, paper King George. We're all three innocent, and that seems to be what's wanted. But at least, sir, said I to James, recovering from my little fit of annoyance, I am Alan's friend, and if I can be helpful to friends of his, I will not stumble at the risk. I thought it best to put a fair face on my consent, for I saw Alan troubled. And besides, thinks I to myself, as soon as my back is turned, they will paper me, as they call it, whether I consent or not. But in this I saw I was wrong, for I had no sooner said the words than Mrs. Stewart leaped out of her chair, came running over to us, and wept first upon my neck and then on Alan's, blessing God for our goodness to her family. As for you, Alan, it was no more than your bounden duty, she said, but for this lad that has come here and seen us at our worst, and seen the goodman fleeching like a suitor, him that by right should give his commands like any king. As for you, my lad, says she, my heart is weary not to have your name, but I have your face, and as long as my heart beats under my bosom I will keep it, and think of it, and bless it. And with that she kissed me, and burst once more into such sobbing that I stood abashed. Hoot, hoot, said Alan, looking mighty silly. The day comes onco soon in this month of July, and tomorrow there'll be a fine to do in Appin, a fine riding of dragoons, and crying of kraken, and running of their coats, and it behoves you and me to be the sooner gone. Thereupon we said farewell, and set out again, bending somewhat eastward, in a fine, mild, dark night, and over much the same broken country as before. And that brings us to the end of the chapter and where we are finishing for tonight. Well, thank you for listening. And there's fireworks going to celebrate the 7th of September. Which country celebrates a thing today? Intense, indeed. Yeah, you happen to be stood next to a murder of someone quite important in the air. They're punctuating the story of it. Yeah, of course. This is probably the battle that is to happen later on. They're just acting that out down the road. Sick. Remember the 7th of September. Yeah. Do you remember the 7th day of September? All these things. But yeah, you stood a little bit too close to a murder, and then decided, sure, I'll be blamed for that, so that other people with whom I'm not affiliated, but this friend of mine, I guess, is affiliated, don't all get hung by the English. Because that's cool. Nothing like a bit of peril as we enter the second half of the book. We've crossed that line a little while ago. We are very much into the second half of the book, I think. How long is this? Blimey. Yeah, no, we're clearly in the second half. Yay, the English. No, the other one. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, that brings us to the end. Dave is on. We can go over and see Dave. Dave's playing some Planet Zoo. I'm surprised he's not finished and raided over here yet. So yeah, let's go see Dave. But yeah, thank you all for being here. No, you're welcome. Thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed what you've heard. Yeah, going to send you over to Dave. You all know who he is. He's a good fella. So there, that's now in place. Great. Lucy is away this week, so there won't be a stream here on Wednesday. I don't know if I have anything that I want. Whether I stream anything over on Longest John's Gaming is going to be dependent on how I feel about doing anything stream-wise on this PC, because I don't want to stream I don't want my laptop just dying in the middle of a stream, and because if it happens once, it means I'm not going to be able to play whatever game I've picked, because it's just going to keep happening. So, yeah, that's exciting. Yeah, thank you for the cross fingers. I don't know, it's kind of a stress, but I need to figure something out, because I need this for work and other streams and things as well. So, yeah, but that's a worry for another time. As I say, thank you all for being here. You've been a wonderful, lovely audience. Go over and say hi to Dave. And if not before next Saturday, I will see you next Saturday for the continuation of Kidnapped. Dun dun dun. Yeah, thank you all. Goodbye and good night.